Hello everyone, I'm Angela and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm really happy and honored to have here on my channel James Kapalo from University College Cork, and he's a specialist in folk religions from Eastern Europe, and he will talk today about folk magic in the Republic of Moldova. So the first question that I'd like to ask you, James, is can you give us an overview about folk magic in the Republic of Moldova?
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be speaking to you today.
I'm very happy to have you on my channel.
Just to say a little bit about the context.
Yes.
And when I was doing the research and what kind of research I actually did and what I found maybe. So my research was in the south of the Republic of Moldova, which is a very, very interesting place. It's an ex-Soviet republic and it's multi-ethnic. So Republic of Moldova has Romanian speakers, Russian speakers, Ukrainians, and my research was amongst a very interesting group of Turkish-speaking Christians. So they have some elements of Islamic culture in there, which comes through in the magic too, but they also are Orthodox Christians. So this very interesting blend of languages and cultures that are present, very present in the folk magic practices, especially in the linguistic aspect of those practices. So I spent maybe a year and a half going backwards and forwards to the Republic of Moldova, working in a group of villages, 5 or 6 villages, and gradually building up some networks, friendship networks and contacts to be able to access women healers. Most of them are called healers in the local context.
So are most of them women?
Most women, not all, I'd say 80%, 80 to 90%.
So there are men? There
are some men, but there are some classifications. So women healers who would be healing in a very, let's say, close associations, close associations to Orthodox Christian practice would be called ilachji. That would be called a healer, literally somebody that heals. But then you also have another category of practitioner, which is defined by the texts that they use, and they're called okuyucus, which means readers. And they're readers because they're passing on charms, verbal charms, small verbal charms. And then there's a third category, which is the buju. And the buju is probably what we would call in English black magic. More suspect. So something people are afraid of. So
the
you
evil
have
witches? Or?
Evil, they wouldn't really have the name witch, but buju means that magic that they're practicing may be doing harm.
Okay, yeah. Harmful magic.
Harmful magic, yeah, exactly. So I kind of worked in these communities and got to meet a number of women that practice in quite different ways. And what helped me a lot actually in the fieldwork, which is a very fortunate sort of happen chance, that I actually fell ill during my field work. I fell ill. I had a problem with my leg, my foot, and
that sounds very shamanistic.
Shamanistic. Well, no, what happened?
the idea of a disease that brings you to.
Yeah. So I was very fortunate. I met a guy who was actually from Cyprus, but his wife was a local, and they invited me to his village to recuperate while I was getting treatment, and then. They were able to bring healers to me, and they practiced in different ways. And because they were actually practicing on me, they were, of course, I was able to see what they were doing, but they also were willing to engage in conversation because they could see it was a genuine case. Obviously, I disclosed that I'm also an academic. I'm interested in these things, and
you were not faking it.
Not faking it. It was a real swollen leg. So that was kind of fortunate, and. What that did was give me a window on the diversity of different healing practices that are there. And once I had that experience, then I was able to travel out to other villages through contacts I had and visit healers. So yeah, that's really the kind of general context. What's important, I think, from that is that the local healers, they were Turkish-speaking healers, but they were drawing on Romanian magic, which is quite in the world of kind of academic studies of magic. You know, Romanian magic is very, very complex as a tradition, but they were also drawing on aspects of Balkan Turkish practice and also in Slavic traditions from the Russians and so on. So that's quite characteristic of the region.
So, do you find it to be eclectic?
quite eclectic, or let's say dynamic. So as and when different villages were influenced by different cultures, they absorbed different elements. So many of the verbal charms, the verbal magic that I collected, which had been transmitted through a couple of generations, but mostly was, let's say, I was only one generation away from the transmission from a different language. So I was speaking to people who were using the charm in Turkish, but they actually received it from a grandparent in Romanian or in Russian, and they dynamically translated it and used it in their own language. Other verbal charms were much older, and you could trace them back to early Balkan traditions or Turkish traditions.
Do they believe that these practices are autochthonous, that they are from the land, or do they acknowledge that there is a syncretism and that they absorbed from other cultures?
I think in the case of the people I'm working with, they're referred to as Gagavuz Turkish. They know that their recent histories of migration. So they have a sense that we're recently here, 200 years. They've been in the Republic of Moldova. Before that, they were in the Balkans. So that is there, and I think they understand that they understand the dynamism of their own culture. But there are certain things that they consider to be their own. To be, this is purely from the Gagavuz tradition. It's not always the case, but they have a sense that is the case.
That's very interesting.
There was one other thing I wanted to say about. It's about the kind of conditions that the healers would work with, and probably the most common, which would be verbal magical charms against the evil eye. This would be one of the most common forms that exist. But then also there's a kind of local condition that they refer to as korku, which is fright, and it's a condition that comes over somebody when they've experienced a shock or a fright, or when they've seen a dead body, and it's some kind of soul. It's described as some kind of soul.
There's the same thing in folk magic in Italy.
Yes, yeah. It's like an attack on the soul, or a disruption to the soul, or a separation within the soul that needs to be brought back together.
Like you lose part of your soul.
So, yes, yeah, exactly.
And then there's a soul retrieval that needs to be done.
Exactly, and that's one of the main components of the let's say the kind of divinationary magic that takes place, because they need to determine what the cause was and how to treat that. So there are a lot of practices around the pouring of wax and lead and tin.
That's in Italy too.
So the pouring of wax, lead or tin, which is like a divination or a kind of a way of seeing into the symptoms of the condition, and then from there the practitioner would decide what they need to do.
Do they use this pouring kind of divination just for soul retrieval, or even for other types of?
They use that to determine what the condition is. So if it's to determine, it's soul retrieval we need to deal with.
Okay.
Well, they wouldn't call it soul retrieval; they would call it fright.
Fright. Okay.
Or if it's evil eye, or there's another tradition, kurma, to do with bones and skin disease. So different things. It's a way of just deciding, what do we actually need? What are we dealing with? Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of roughly the context. Like I said, mainly women practitioners, but not all. A lot of women practitioners that would combine what we would call classically kind of magical charms without a religious framing, with prayer. So with Orthodox Christian prayer, and also with the use of apocryphal Christian texts. There's a very strong tradition of the copying and writing of Orthodox Christian apocryphal texts, so not accepted by the church, and then using them in a ritual way within a ritual healing context.
That's very interesting. And what would be the definition that you would give of folk magic, or magic even?
So that's a complex question, and actually I wrote my whole PhD.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. I wrote my whole PhD really trying to define what folk religion is, and I was very interested in the relationship between the texts that were being used, the verbal charms or the bookable text, the contexts in which it sits there, and the performance itself of the actual magical ritual religious acts. So my book's actually called Text, Context and Performance, about this kind of complexity. So I would always hesitate to call something magic or religion or magico-religious, which is the term that some people use to try and express that. And I see it all sitting within one cultural complex. Magic has always been a way of denigrating what someone does, attacking the tradition, creating an aura of suspicion about what's done, devaluing and so on. And then if you call it prayer, then you kind of elevate it to some heavenly realm. My view is that all of the things that they do are somewhere in between, and they may be accepted by the church to a degree or completely rejected by the church, but actually in essence the practices themselves combine elements of invocation of angels or the Virgin Mary. They also involve the power of verbal magic and analogy and so on you get in magical traditions, with the power of the practitioner that's accumulated through their own lineage, for example, their birth. One example is that women who are born as a twin have certain magical powers to cure. Actually, in the one instance that I came across, it was to cure limbs. So if you were a twin, you would have the power to deal with any problems to do with legs and arms. So that's interesting. So there are those kind of things, which that's about the magic being embodied in the person. Some kind of power comes through that, or from the divine, or from kind of the ritual practice itself. So it's this combination of different elements that is actually very difficult as a researcher to capture, and it's very difficult to get the practitioners to explain to you where the significance lies in each component of that complex.
Because sometimes practitioners just do their practices, and it's up to scholars to try and find patterns.
They don't theorize it for us, we have to do that.
We have to theorize according to the patterns that practitioners show and manifest. So what do you think is magic as opposed to religion or another practice? What distinguishes magic?
Again, for me, it's problematic, the distinction in the first place, and there's been a lot of work by Eastern European scholars that try and set up a distinction based on, where what you're invoking, or where the power ultimately resides. But as I explained, in Moldovan tradition, as in Romanian tradition, as in Hungarian tradition, it's a multiple directional thing. So the practice sits within this complex tradition, whereby the power of God or angels or the Virgin Mary is recognized, it's there, it's needed. The power of the individual is recognized. So some of the healers themselves draw on and explain that this, I'll give you an example. Many closing formulas in the magic in the region end with the power comes from God, the cure comes from me. Okay, so there you read like a distinction that the practitioner is making, and I'm drawing on a power, but it's me that's doing it. But the magic, it resides in the of the practice of the person, and I think that's to do with the construction of the identity and the power that lies in the secrecy of that role, and the natural inclination and attributes maybe of the person that's taken on that role, because it's kind of, sometimes it can be a conscious career decision. So I've met women that spend most of their life up until their 40s and 50s observing other healers and gathering little bits of knowledge and then understanding, and now I'm ready to practice. And it's about reimagining, situating yourself as a practitioner within this cultural complex. So if you want to call them magicians, that's fine, but they are like, cultural agents. It's like cultural agents, and they are inclined usually towards helping people and using whatever special attributes they have, either through their family lineage or through their accumulated life experience and so on, to affect magic.
So magic is still believed to come from the person. The
person with external help.
Forces. Yeah, so it's like the person is channeling or harnessing.
Channeling, harnessing. The culture of dreams is really important, which I haven't mentioned so far. So at least 3 or 4 of the most interesting women that I met explained their empowerment to practice as having come from a dream, which is a shamanic tradition that would relate directly to. I wouldn't call it shamanic itself, but I think dream empowerment is an important aspect in this. And so it's a visitation. In a Christian context, it's usually by the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary, who, in one case I've written about, delivers the charm text to the woman, says, "This is a charm, can you learn it?" And in the dream or the vision, the Virgin Mary requests, her name was Varvara Neni, Varvara Bobu, to please repeat the charm to me, and if you can repeat the charm, then you have the charm. So in the dream, she repeats the charm and receives the words. And from that point on, she went on to practice as a charmer. And that's her, she sees it as a direct gift. These magical words were given to me. And that was the case in a number of cases, that the Virgin Mary visited women that were having particularly problematic periods in their life. Perhaps they were, one woman recently become widowed, 6 children, no way to feed them, and the Virgin Mary visited and said, "Look, here's a text
so
that will help you heal people." Yeah.
There appears to be always a religious, a way of framing the practice with religion.
In the cases of well-known healers, this is definitely the case, and it's also to do with a kind of legitimation process. But in some of the simplest charm practices, which may be very, very simple ones that are passed down to families to protect the children against the evil eye or against fright, which commonly, there are things that are diagnosed when a child is nervous or wets the bed or something. These are the diagnoses. They don't have this religious framing, but then the practitioner is a member of the family usually and doesn't need any external legitimation to practice. So, there are very...
So basically, do you think that religion is implemented in order to legitimize the practice itself?
Yes, in some cases, but that would be an oversimplification, because it would imply that it's just a strategy or a tactic, whereas when you grow up in a culture, it's embedded within your cultural consciousness. I recently had a conversation with a scholar and practitioner of Yahe visionary magic, so ayahuasca magic, and we were discussing how the images that are present within the practice come, and of course, there is a degree in which the cultural embeddedness of the context gives rise to certain images that make sense to you culturally. So the Mother of God, for example, in Eastern Europe makes sense culturally to women there. This is one of the figures. It's an archetypal figure, if you like, that is there and will be drawn on. But so that would be my kind of explanation of that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think would be the main characteristic or the main characteristics of folk magic in Moldova?
So it's this. I mean, I think I've said already. This combination of the use of the verbal charm tradition that's passed down through families, with a strong religious imagery and dimension that manifests through the use of apocryphal Christian texts to be incorporated into practices, and this dream culture, and then perhaps this fluidity, this cultural translation that happens a lot between Turkish speakers, Romanian speakers, Russian speakers, Bulgarian speakers. So I worked a lot when I was doing my research on women's manuscripts, notebooks that they'd written different texts in, and it was fascinating because, you know, one woman explained, well, this I got this from a local gypsy woman, Romani gypsy woman, and then you turn the page and it's written in Russian, so, oh yeah, I took this from a Russian church book, and then the next page, oh, this is from an exorcism text from the Romanian liturgy, and different elements are sort of woven and combined to create a kind of quite idiosyncratic, let's say. Syncretic, I'm not so sure I like this term, because it can also be used in a kind of derogatory sense, because all traditions are syncretic ultimately. They will all accumulate layers of tradition. So
yeah. And how do they get initiated? How does this power get passed on?
So again, in different ways. Like I said, there are families that have traditions that they pass on through the family, and so it sometimes goes mother to son, then son to daughter, so male female line, but usually one child will be chosen to carry the tradition forward.
Can somebody outside the bloodline be initiated?
They can. I mean, when we say initiated,
of course.
It's not initiated, but it would. I mean, in the case of the kind of simple magical practices, it would be they would be allowed to listen to the words, capture them, and use them, and because they're kept secret. So when you visit a charmer or a healer in Moldova, they don't say the words out loud explicitly. They would whisper the words. But if they want you to catch them, they will say them a little bit more clearly.
And can you use them once you've been able to hear them, or?
So the idea is that, you know, the kind of if you've captured them correctly, heard them correctly, then you can use them.
Oh, okay.
But you would be once that's happened, the power that the person had to deliver the charm themselves goes. So you wouldn't expect to be empowered to pass on unless somebody is, you know, close to the end of their life and they're ready to pass on the tradition to the next generation. So, like I said, there are women that try to pick up different bits from other practitioners and use them. But in the strictest sense, you know, when my mother or father is passing away, they would give me the words and I would take it to the next generation. That would be the most common form. Yeah. But there is this, like I say, this kind of more learned, engaged tradition of, you know, combining texts and using them in different ways, and then using your own different gestures and things to embellish and make a kind of larger ritual context that maybe is a little bit mimicking a kind of church context, introducing different materials. I haven't spoken about materials, but it'd be common to use a horseshoe, for example. See, what's interesting about Eastern Europe, and especially the Republic of Moldova and the ex-Soviet republics, is because churches were closed down in the 1950s and in the 1960s. And so the power that was considered to be present, protective power that came from religion in the church, sometimes was harnessed by taking bits of the church and then using them in their practices. So one of the women I visited a number of times used an old piece of church chandelier, which she secretly got blessed by a priest unknowingly, and a horseshoe that she found and also got blessed by a priest. So it's harnessing, if you like, the power of the church and incorporating that also into the magical practice or to the healing practices. So there are a number of different ways that these things can accrue. So the family lineage is one of them, but then harnessing external, sources of energy or power and using them and incorporating them.
Does secrecy play a big role in this kind of magic?
It does. That's one of the ways that kind of, if we're talking about communities here where most people know each other, so they're kind of traditional communities, and if it's known, for example, that a family holds this healing practice, generally speaking, the community know precisely what that family knows how to heal or cure. So if you need a cure for fright, then you go to this lady. If you need it for evil eye, then you go to this lady. And so their ability to hold on and maintain the secrecy of their particular charm is important, because as soon as the community thinks that that's been let out, then the idea is that, well, the power's gone from the family lineage. So yes, secrecy is important, and that's very clear when you're witnessing a charm practice and see what people do. They're quite happy to perform in front of you, to carry out the practice, but it's whispered and it's never explained.
This was it for today's video. I hope you liked it. If you like this video, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for all the academic fun. And remember, you will find all the references to Kapalo's publications in the info box down below, so do check it out. So, bye for now.
Bye.